The room felt smaller than it should have, like a trap that had closed in without warning. Qiao Bailu sat at her desk, the only light in the room coming from a flickering desk lamp. The shadows stretched long, creeping across the walls, and for a moment, it felt as though the world outside had ceased to exist. All that remained was the crumpled letter she had just received, now sitting on the edge of her desk, daring her to make a decision that could alter the course of her entire future. She didn't move for what felt like an eternity. Her hands were still, but her mind raced. 10,000 yuan. The offer from the publisher was right there in black and white. It was everything she had worked for. Or was it? She had spent countless nights weaving stories, pouring her soul into her words. And now, the first real opportunity to see her work in print was before her. But the price didn't feel right. It wasn't enough. Was it? Her breath caught in her throat and she slammed her hand on the desk, the noise shattering the silence that had grown suffocating around her. The letter still lay there, an unforgiving reminder of her dilemma. 10,000 yuan, but at what cost? Her mind swirled, a storm of thoughts crashing together, each one competing for dominance. The pressure from her family weighed heavily on her chest. They were counting on her. She was counting on her. Her father, who worked tirelessly to make ends meet, who sacrificed everything to ensure she had a chance at something better. Her mother, who constantly held back tears, hoping to see her daughter succeed. And then there was her younger brother, Zhao Zhenting, who had never fully understood the burden his sister carried, but whose innocent smile was enough to make her want to keep fighting. For them, she couldn't fail. But how could she accept such a small price for something she knew could be worth so much more? The voices inside her head whispered, "You deserve more. You're worth more than this. Don't sell yourself short." The thought of walking away from the offer made her stomach twist. What if no one else would offer her a chance? What if this was it? What if this was the only opportunity that would ever come her way? And what if, by refusing it, she lost everything? What if? A sharp knock on the door shattered her thoughts, dragging her back to reality. She jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She quickly shoved the letter into a drawer, as if hiding it would somehow erase the tension gnawing at her. "Qiao Bailu," a voice called from the other side. It was her teacher. "I need to speak with you." She stood, her legs shaky as though her body had betrayed her, and walked to the door. The hallway outside was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old textbooks and chalk. Her teacher, an older man with a face full of lines and disappointment, stood waiting. "What's going on with you, Bailu?" he asked, his tone more resigned than curious. "You've been distracted lately. Your grades are slipping. You're not the same." Qiao Bailu bit her lip. She didn't want to explain. She didn't want to tell him about the pressure, about the endless nights spent in front of a screen, typing away as if her life depended on it. She didn't want to tell him about the letter. She didn't want to explain the battle raging inside her. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Just a little tired, that's all. Her teacher didn't buy it. He raised an eyebrow, studying her with a knowing gaze. Is it really just tiredness? Or is something else on your mind? Something you're afraid to admit even to yourself? Her throat tightened. Afraid to admit. She wanted to scream, to tell him everything. The weight of her decisions. The fear that clawed at her insides. But the words never left her lips. Instead, she nodded, her eyes cast downward. I'll try harder. The teacher's face softened. You're a talented student, Bailu, but you can't let whatever this is cloud your judgment. Don't lose sight of what's important. As she turned to walk back to her room, his words echoed in her mind, but they felt distant, hollow. What was important? She didn't know anymore. The world had become a blur of obligations and responsibilities, a constant pressure to succeed without ever being allowed to fail. Was that what was important? Or was it the dreams that had kept her going through the darkest nights? The stories she wanted to tell. Stories that could change the world. Her hands shook as she returned to her desk. The drawer where she had hidden the letter, now seeming like a vault, keeping her fate sealed inside. The silence of the room felt deafening. What do I do? She asked herself. What's the right choice? Her breath caught in her chest again, and for the first time, she realized just how heavy the decision was. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the letter or the publisher's offer. It was about who she was becoming and who she was afraid of becoming if she didn't choose the right path. She couldn't be that person. Not now. Not ever. The air in the room felt thick with the weight of her thoughts, and for the briefest moment, everything around her faded away. There was only the question, lingering in the darkness. Who was she really fighting for? The quiet whispers of doubt and ambition mingled, creating a storm inside her mind. And in that silence, she made a decision. It wasn't clear, not yet, but something inside her had shifted. Something dark and powerful had awoken. And now, there was no turning back. As the shadows outside her window grew longer, Qiao Bailu knew that she had crossed a line, and the world would never be the same. Qiao Bailu stared at the letter in front of her. The words blurred in her vision. 10,000 yuan. The publisher's offer sat coldly on the page, like a promise wrapped in chains. It was an offer, yes, but the weight of its insignificance struck her hard. Was this really the price of her dreams? Could her future, her passion, her endless hours of writing really be worth so little? The room felt smaller than it had before. The oppressive silence of the space, the flickering lamp overhead, it all mirrored the swirling chaos inside her mind. She could feel the pressure rising in her chest, her breath shallow. How had she gotten here? She had worked so hard, poured everything she had into her writing. Yet here she was, staring at a number that felt like an insult. Her fingers grazed the edges of the letter, hesitant to touch it fully, as if doing so might somehow confirm the decision she knew she wasn't ready to make. Was 10,000 yuan truly enough to fulfill her dreams? Was it enough to justify the years of struggle? The countless nights spent writing until her eyes burned, the moments when she thought she could never finish another word. Qiao Bailu closed her eyes, the soft thrum of her heartbeat filling her ears. She couldn't help but think back to her past, back to the days when she had first started writing. Those were the days when the world felt full of possibilities, when her stories could take her anywhere. She remembered the fleeting joy of seeing her work posted online, earning small amounts of money that were enough to buy a meal or a book she had long wanted. At that time, it felt like progress. But now, with the promise of publication, with the idea of seeing her name on a real book cover, could she really settle for so little? In the past, I could have earned more, she thought bitterly. With just the internet, I was making 20,000 yen for a novel this size, and that's not even considering what I could have earned from the publishing rights. So why am I here with this measly offer? Her mind began to race, the thoughts cascading one after another. She had fought for this moment, worked tirelessly for it, and yet, was this it? Was this all she was worth? Or worse, was this the best offer she would ever get? But as quickly as that thought came, another one followed, more insidious, more dangerous. What if this is all I'll get? What if I turn this down, and nothing ever comes again? What if no one else will offer me anything? What if I'm stuck, forever caught in this cycle of dreaming, without ever reaching the finish line? She opened her eyes, the weight of the letter pressing down on her once again, the thought of losing everything, the possibility of failure, of watching her family suffer even more, was too much to bear. Her mind flashed to her parents, especially her father. She could still see his tired eyes, the lines etched into his face from years of hard work. He had always told her that education was the key to breaking the cycle, that her future was in her hands. But if she failed to make the right decision, if she didn't accept this offer, what would she have to show for all the sacrifices they had made? Her mother's face also appeared in her mind, a woman who hid her worries behind a smile, who tried so hard to keep the family afloat, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. I can't let them down, she thought desperately. They've sacrificed too much for me. I can't be the one who lets it all slip away. The weight of her family's struggles was a constant, heavy presence in her life. She had always known that their future depended on her success, on her ability to rise above the circumstances they were in. Her father's debts, her mother's silent anxiety, the constant uncertainty of their financial situation. It was all resting on her shoulders, and if she didn't act, if she didn't take this chance, they would only fall further into despair. Qiao Bailu turned her gaze away from the letter, looking out the window instead. The sky had begun to darken, the orange glow of the sunset fading into twilight. The world outside seemed so distant, so unaffected by the storm that raged inside her. The wind stirred the leaves on the trees outside, but inside she was frozen, torn between the safety of accepting the offer and the fear of what might come if she did. Her thoughts twisted and turned, each one pulling her in a different direction. Should I take the offer and secure my family's future? Or should I hold out for something better, risking everything in the process? She was a writer. Her whole life had been about creating stories, building worlds where anything was possible. But here, now, in the real world, the choices felt like walls closing in on her. For a moment, she thought about walking away from it all, leaving the letter in the drawer, pretending it never existed, and continuing to write as she always had. The thought of giving up the dream of publication, of living in the comfort of anonymity, seemed almost appealing. But the longer she thought about it, the more she realized that giving up wasn't an option. She could never go back to that place where nothing mattered. She had worked too hard, come too far, to stop now. No, she thought, taking a deep breath, her resolve beginning to harden. I can't let fear control me. I can't keep letting my family's struggles dictate my choices. This is my life. I have to live it on my own terms. But as she stared at the letter again, she felt the familiar wave of doubt sweep over her. Is it enough? Would this decision be the right one? Would it be enough to silence the doubts? Her fingers brushed against the edges of the letter once more, and for a brief, fleeting moment, she wondered if she could walk away from it all, just leave it all behind. But she knew she couldn't. Not now. Not ever. With a heavy heart, Qiao Bailu reached for the letter again, her fingers trembling as she prepared to make her choice. The battle inside her wasn't over yet, but the time to decide had come, and in that moment, she knew, whatever she chose, nothing would ever be the same again. Qiao Bailu sat at her desk, the weight of the decision she had made earlier still pressing on her mind, but she couldn't afford to let it consume her. The school year was in full swing, and the competition in the classroom had only intensified. Every test, every assignment felt like a battle, one that could determine her future. She couldn't afford to let her grades slip now, not when everything was riding on her success. The classroom buzzed with the usual hum of activity. Students whispered to one another, occasionally glancing at her. But Qiao Bailu couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. She sat at her desk, but her mind was elsewhere, caught between the world of academia and the weight of the decisions she had to make about her writing. Her eyes drifted to the front of the room, where the teacher was preparing for the day's lecture. The board was already filled with equations and notes, but to Qiao Bailu, it all felt distant, as if the world outside of her academic responsibilities no longer held any meaning. She had to succeed. She had to prove to her family, to herself, that all the sacrifices would not be in vain. The pressure was overwhelming, and that's when her gaze landed on Xie Jiayuan. He was seated in the row ahead of her, his focus fixed entirely on the material in front of him. His handwriting was neat, precise, and his mind seemed always to be a step ahead. Qiao Bailu couldn't help but admire his ability to focus so intently, while she constantly fought against the distractions that clouded her thoughts. Why does he always seem so calm? She thought, a tinge of envy in her heart. She had known Xie Jiayuan since the beginning of high school, and in all the years she had known him, he had always been the top student, silent, diligent, and unwavering in his resolve. But it wasn't just his academic excellence that intrigued her. It was his patience, his willingness to help others without hesitation, even when he could have easily focused on his own studies. That's why I'm sitting here now, Qiao Bailu realized, because I asked him for help, because despite my stubbornness, I know he's the one who can explain things to me the clearest. She remembered the first time they studied together. It had been a quiet Saturday afternoon, the last few hours of the day fading into dusk. She had sat down beside him in the library, uncertain of what to ask, but knowing that she was too far behind to catch up alone. Xie Jiayuan had smiled, a small, reassuring curve of his lips, before opening his textbook and patiently walking her through every step of the problem. He didn't rush, didn't show any signs of frustration, even when she asked the same question twice or 3 times. He's different, she thought, so calm, so patient. It had been his kindness, his generosity with his time, that made her realize something she hadn't been willing to admit before. Xie Jiayuan was important to me. She wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but the more they studied together, the more she realized how much she valued his presence. His quiet support was like an anchor in her chaotic world. He never demanded anything in return, not even acknowledgement. All he wanted was for her to succeed, and as she thought about it now, she could feel her heart shift just a little. What is this? She had always thought of him as a classmate, a fellow student who helped her when she needed it most. But now, the bond between them was something more. She had felt it in the way his eyes would occasionally meet hers when they studied, in the subtle way he would lean in just a little closer when explaining something she hadn't quite understood. It was small, quiet moments, but they mattered to her more than she realized. Is this something more than friendship? Qiao Bailu wondered. She shook her head, pushing the thought aside. No, she told herself. I can't afford distractions right now. I have to focus. Still, as the days passed, the thoughts wouldn't leave her. The more she studied with Xie Jiayuan, the more she realized just how much he had become a part of her life. He wasn't just a study partner anymore. He had become someone she could rely on, someone who didn't judge her for her insecurities, someone who never made her feel inadequate, no matter how much she struggled. She caught herself looking for him between classes, seeking his steady presence in the halls. At lunch, during breaks, he was always there, never pushing her, but always close enough to catch her when she stumbled. Yet, even with all the time they spent together, there was a wall, something unspoken, a boundary that neither of them crossed. He helped her with her studies, yes, but there was always this quiet understanding between them that their bond was still limited to just that, and maybe that was enough for now. After all, Qiao Bailu's world was consumed by the weight of her family's expectations, by the pressure of doing well in school, by the need to make the right decision for her future. She didn't have time for feelings or relationships. Or at least, that's what she told herself. But as she sat in class, watching him raise his hand to answer the teacher's question, his calmness a stark contrast to the anxiety twisting in her chest. Qiao Bailu couldn't help but wonder, what if there was more between them? What if there could be more? She quickly shook the thought away again, focusing instead on the lecture, forcing herself to stay in the present, to push aside the growing emotions that seemed to tug at her from the edges of her mind. But deep down, she knew one thing was certain. Xie Jiayuan had become someone irreplaceable in her life, even if she didn't fully understand why. Yet, for now, all she could do was try to balance the weight of her schoolwork, the pressure of her family's expectations, and the subtle, growing connection she felt with him. Qiao Bailu's footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway as she walked toward the teacher's office. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the last. She had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. The whispers had grown louder in the past few days, rumors swirling about her relationship with Xie Jiayuan, but she had never expected it to reach the ears of her teacher. As she reached the door, her hand hesitated for a moment before knocking. The voice from within called out, "Come in." She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her palms clammy and her mind racing. Her teacher, Mr. Li, sat at his desk, papers scattered in front of him. He looked up from his work and gave her a measured look, his eyes tired but sharp. "Qiao Bailu, please, have a seat," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. Qiao Bailu sat down, her back straight, but her fingers curled tightly in her lap. She avoided his gaze, her heart still hammering in her chest. The silence between them stretched out thick and suffocating. Finally, Mr. Li broke it. "I've been hearing some disturbing things, Bailu," he began, his tone serious. "About you and Xie Jiayuan. People are saying you two are involved." Qiao Bailu's face flushed, her mind going blank. She had been expecting this, but it didn't make it any easier. "It's not true," she said quickly, her voice shaking slightly. "We're just study partners. Nothing more." Mr. Li studied her for a moment, his gaze unyielding. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "Because it's affecting your grades, Bailu. Your focus is slipping, and it's starting to show in your work. I'm concerned about you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. How could she explain? How could she explain the pressure of everything weighing down on her? The expectations of her family, the constant drive to succeed, the rumors that were suffocating her at school. It was all too much. But there was no room for excuses. She couldn't tell him that she had been falling apart inside, that her every decision was clouded by fear, by the weight of her own doubts. I'm sorry, Mr. Li," she said quietly, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "I'll do better. I'll focus more." The teacher nodded slowly, but his expression softened. "I believe in your potential, Bailu. You're a bright student, but you have to learn how to manage the pressures around you. Don't let them distract you from your goals." Her chest tightened. Manage the pressures. How could she? She could barely manage herself. She left the office feeling heavier than she had when she entered. Every step felt like she was sinking deeper into a pit she couldn't escape. She didn't even remember walking back to the classroom, her mind lost in a fog of frustration. Focus more, Mr. Lee had said. Do better. But how could she, when everything seemed to be falling apart? The rumors about Xie Jiayuan, the pressure from her family, the endless assignments. It was all too much. She had always prided herself on her ability to keep going, to push through. But now, she wasn't so sure. Sitting back at her desk, she tried to focus on the lesson, but her thoughts refused to stay quiet. Every time she glanced at Xie Jiayuan, sitting across the room, his calm demeanor only made her feel more inadequate. He had it all together. He always had it together. But she felt like she was barely holding on. Her mind raced, her heart heavy with the weight of self-doubt. Am I good enough? Can I even achieve the things I've dreamed about? The words seemed to echo in her head, getting louder and louder until she couldn't push them away. Her failures, small and large, seemed to hang over her like a dark cloud. She had worked so hard, but it didn't feel like it was enough. No matter how much she tried, she always felt like she was falling short. The pressure from her family was constant, like a weight on her shoulders. Her father had sacrificed so much for her to have a chance at a better life. And her mother tried so hard to keep up appearances, to act like everything was okay, even when they were both barely getting by. And then there was her younger brother, Qiao Jiayuan, whose innocence only made her feel more guilty. She was supposed to be the one to make everything better, the one who could change their lives. But now, with each passing day, she wondered if she was just fooling herself. Her stomach twisted at the thought of disappointing them all. She had promised her family that she would succeed, that their struggles would not be in vain. But now, everything seemed so uncertain. The pressure, the expectations. It was all too much. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized just how alone she felt. She was isolated in a world that demanded perfection, in a life that gave her no room for failure. There was no escape from the constant expectations. No matter what she did, it was never enough, not for her family, not for her teachers, and not even for herself. Qiao Bailu closed her eyes for a moment, trying to push the overwhelming feelings away. But they wouldn't leave. She had always been determined, always pushed forward. But now, in the face of everything, she felt like she was losing herself. The weight of the decisions she had made, the choices she still had to make, felt too much to bear. Can I really do this? She asked herself, but the answer was unclear. The path forward felt hazy, uncertain. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't know if she could keep walking. She had worked so hard, but was it even enough? Would it ever be enough? Qiao Bailu stared at the new letter that had arrived. The paper in her hand slightly crumpled from the tension of her grip. This time, it wasn't the first publisher's offer she had received. No, it was something different. The second publisher, one she hadn't expected to hear from, had responded. She wasn't sure how to feel about it. After all, it came with a new set of conditions, different from the first, but also tied to the same uncertainty. The offer was for a 10-year copyright agreement, a longer term than she had anticipated. But the payment, it was only 8,000 yuan. It was lower than the first offer of 10,000. A part of her mind told her that maybe it wasn't enough. Why would anyone take such a deal when there's a better offer on the table? But the more she read through the contract, the more it felt like a lifeline. A 10-year agreement. That's security, isn't it? The thought of a steady income from royalties over the years felt like a small victory. Maybe it wasn't everything she had dreamed of, but it was something tangible, something real. She sighed, rubbing her eyes with her fingers. Why is everything so complicated? Why couldn't things just be simple? Why couldn't she just have the one clear answer that would make everything fall into place? But it wasn't that easy. Life never was, not for someone like her, who was always standing on the edge of so many competing demands. Her family's expectations, her own ambitions, and now this. Two offers that were, in a way, both promising and limiting at the same time. 10,000 yuan, 8,000 yuan. Which one would give her the future she truly wanted? She couldn't help but think back to her earlier days as a writer, when things had been simpler. She could write and publish for herself, working without anyone, looking over her shoulder. But now, everything was different. She wasn't just writing for the love of it anymore. She was writing for survival, for her family, for herself, for a future that she couldn't quite see, but could feel slipping away if she didn't act. For a moment, Qiao Bailu closed her eyes and let the weight of the decision settle over her. The two choices sat there like two paths in front of her, each with its own set of consequences, its own risks. She had already let one opportunity slip by. Could she afford to let another one pass? Was this what it meant to be a writer? To always choose between survival and ambition? As she sat at her desk, the room around her grew quiet, the hum of the outside world fading away as the pressure in her chest mounted. The sound of her own breathing was the only thing that remained, steady but shallow. Do I want security or the chance to prove myself more? Is taking the safe road enough, or should I take a risk and gamble for something greater? It was the same question she had asked herself when she had first received the publisher's offer, but now it felt different. There was something in her that had changed. She wasn't just a frightened girl waiting to be rescued anymore. She had fought to get this far, and no matter how many setbacks she faced, she wasn't ready to stop. She needed to move forward. She couldn't keep hesitating, not when there was a chance to secure something, even if it wasn't the dream she had imagined. I can do better, she thought, gripping the contract tighter in her hands. I can work harder. I can make this work. The words of Mr. Li echoed in her mind. Don't let the pressure break you. Use it to propel yourself forward. She had always been someone who thrived under pressure, someone who could push through even when things seemed impossible. She couldn't let fear of failure stop her now. Even if this offer wasn't perfect, it was still a step forward. She could take this and use it to build the future she wanted. Her mind turned back to her family, their sacrifices, their hopes, their trust in her. I can't let them down, she thought, her heart tightening. I have to keep going. She had promised them so much, and now it was her turn to prove that she could do more than dream. She could act. She could make the hard decisions. She sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. The weight in her chest wasn't gone, but it was bearable. The tension in her muscles faded slightly as she came to a decision. No, this wasn't the perfect offer, but it was a step that would keep her moving forward, that would give her the time and resources to prove herself, to take more chances when the time was right. She wasn't going to stand still anymore. Her eyes flickered to the clock on the wall. Time was slipping away. She had to choose. And now, after all the uncertainty and fear, she knew what she had to do. She would take the offer, not because it was the dream she had always hoped for, but because it was a chance, a second chance to prove that she could still make her mark on the world. She grabbed the pen from her desk, a sense of resolve building in her chest. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the ultimate victory, but it was the next step, and sometimes that was all you needed to move forward. With a steady hand, she signed the contract, her signature bold and sure. Qiao Bailu sat at her desk, the soft light from the lamp casting long shadows across the room. The signed contract lay before her, the ink still fresh but the decision already cemented in her heart. It was the lesser offer, 8,000 yuan for a 10-year copyright agreement. Not the 10,000 she had hoped for, not the quick recognition she had dreamed of, but something else. Stability, time, a foundation to build on. She looked at the contract one last time, her hand resting lightly on the paper. There were no more doubts. She had thought long and hard, weighed the risks, felt the pressure of every choice. But now, as she sat there was only a deep, steady feeling of resolve. She had made the decision, and it felt right. This is the right choice for me, she thought, her fingers curling into a fist. The sense of clarity that washed over her was almost overwhelming. She had spent so much time looking for a single, perfect opportunity that she had nearly overlooked the simple truth that sometimes the best choice isn't the most glamorous. Sometimes the best choice is the one that allows you to keep going, the one that lets you continue to grow. This contract will give me the stability I need to keep creating, she realized. It's not about rushing for the big breakthrough. It's about building something lasting. Her mind turned to the future. There were many paths ahead, all filled with their own challenges. The life she dreamed of wouldn't come easily. She knew that. But this decision, this step, was the beginning of something bigger. She took a deep breath, her chest filling with a new kind of determination. In the past, her dreams had been driven by the need for instant success. She wanted recognition, wanted to prove herself, wanted to be seen, but now something had shifted inside her. She was no longer seeking validation from others. She had finally understood that her worth wasn't tied to the approval of a publisher or the praise of the world. It was tied to her own perseverance, her own refusal to give up. I can build this, she thought. I can create something of my own, something that matters. The thought of creating something lasting, of building a career on her own terms, filled her with a quiet excitement. She had spent so many years feeling lost, trapped between the expectations of others and her own desires. But now, the path was clear. She didn't need to race toward the future anymore. She just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And each step, no matter how small, would bring her closer to the life she had always imagined for herself. She smiled softly to herself, imagining what the years ahead could look like. She saw herself sitting at her desk, fingers dancing over the keyboard, crafting stories that made her heart race with excitement. She saw herself sitting at a coffee shop, her latest novel finished, watching people read her words, people she would never meet, but who would be touched by her stories. She saw herself surrounded by a small but dedicated team, a publisher who believed in her work, editors who respected her vision. It wouldn't happen overnight. She knew that. But with the stability of the 10-year contract, she could grow her craft, hone her skills, and build something that would stand the test of time. She didn't need to be famous. She didn't need to be at the top. What mattered now was that she was moving in the right direction. The fear that had once paralyzed her began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of pride. She had made a choice, not out of fear or desperation, but because she understood what it took to truly succeed. She understood now that success wasn't about a single moment of glory. It was about the quiet, persistent effort over time. It was about creating even when no one was watching. It was about finding peace in the work itself, and knowing that each piece, each step, was part of the larger picture. Qiao Bailu leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. She felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest, the kind of satisfaction that only comes from knowing that you've made a decision that is true to who you are. I can do this, she thought again, and this time she didn't doubt herself. She was ready for whatever came next. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was no longer afraid of the hard work it would take. She knew the path would be full of setbacks, full of moments when the weight of her dreams would feel too heavy to carry. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. Not really. She had her family, her friends, and most importantly, she had herself, her own determination, her own will to keep going was stronger than any obstacle that might come her way. Qiao Bailu opened her eyes and glanced around the room. The walls that had once felt like a prison, now seeming more like the foundation of something solid. She was no longer just waiting for success to find her. She was creating it, one step at a time. And this time, she wasn't going to stop until she had built something she could be proud of. The future is mine, she thought, her heart beating steadily in her chest. And with that, she stood up from the desk, ready to face whatever came next, with confidence, with determination, and with the quiet assurance that she was on the right path. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow over Qiao Bailu's desk. She sat there, her fingers lightly tracing the pages of her newly signed contract, still feeling the weight of the decision she had made. It was done now. There was no turning back. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She had chosen a path forward. Her heart felt lighter, though a part of her still struggled to fully embrace the gravity of the choice. She had always been independent, always pushing herself forward, but this time she realized how much she needed the people around her, and that realization brought her to a new understanding of the relationships in her life. Relationships that, for so long, she had kept at arm's length. Xie Jiayuan was the first person who came to her mind. Over the past few months, they had spent more time together, studying, talking, and perhaps most importantly, learning to trust one another. He had always been there, even when the weight of the world seemed to fall on her shoulders. But it wasn't just the late-night study sessions that brought them closer. It was his quiet, unwavering support that had become the constant she never knew she needed. Qiao Bailu remembered the last time they had studied together. The sun had already set, and the small cafe they frequented had grown quiet, save for the soft clink of cups and the faint hum of the espresso machine. Xie Jiayuan had noticed the tiredness in her eyes before she even spoke. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he had said, his voice calm yet filled with concern. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." She had tried to brush it off with a smile, but the truth was his words had struck her deeper than she expected. She hadn't realized just how isolated she had been until that moment. Her family, her studies, her dreams, they were all so closely tied together that she had forgotten how much she relied on others. But Xie Jiayuan's quiet presence reminded her that she didn't have to carry the burden alone. "I know," she had replied softly, "but it's just, I've got so much riding on this, I don't want to disappoint anyone." His expression softened and he leaned in, his voice low. "Bailu, you're not alone in this. You never have been." Those words had stayed with her long after their study session ended. Even now, as she sat in her room, she could still hear them echoing in her mind. Xie Jiayuan wasn't just a friend. He had become a reliable companion on her journey. He understood the pressure she felt, the constant need to prove herself. But he also knew when to step back and let her breathe. As if on cue, her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from him. "Are you okay? I've been thinking about your decision. I know it wasn't easy, but I believe in you. No matter what, you'll find your way." She couldn't help but smile at the simple, reassuring words. Even without the heavy expectations of a romantic relationship, Xie Jiayuan had proven to be someone she could rely on. His support was steady, unwavering, and it gave her the strength she needed to continue moving forward. But it wasn't just Xie Jiayuan who had stood by her. Her friends, the ones who had seen her at her best and worst, had also offered their unwavering support. Liu, Wenjing, always the outspoken one, had been the first to offer a laugh when she heard about Qiao Bailu's decision. "You always think too much," she had said, shaking her head. "Just follow your gut. You've got this." Yang Na, who was quiet but incredibly perceptive, had given her a hug without saying much, but the warmth of it had spoken volumes. She knew that Qiao Bailu didn't need advice or words. She just needed someone to stand by her side. Even Gao Huan, who had often been distant in the past, had sent her a quick message. "Oh, you'll be fine. We're all rooting for you." It was these little gestures, these small acts of kindness, that reminded Qiao Bailu how important it was to have a support system. She didn't have to navigate the challenges alone, even when everything felt like it was falling apart. It wasn't just about getting through the hard moments, though. It was about the quiet reassurance that came with knowing she wasn't facing them in isolation. These were the people who had witnessed her struggles, and they understood. They knew the kind of pressure she was under, and yet they continued to cheer her on. Their support was the quiet force behind her decision, the subtle encouragement that had pushed her to choose the path that was right for her. As she reflected on all of this, Qiao Bailu realized how much her perspective had shifted. When she first started her journey, she had been so focused on the end goal, so determined to succeed, that she had forgotten the importance of the people around her. She had tried to carry everything alone, thinking that was the only way to achieve her dreams. But now, she understood that success wasn't just about what she could accomplish by herself. It was about the relationships she built along the way, the bonds she forged with people who cared about her, not just as a student or a writer, but as a person. She couldn't help but think about the future. Her path wouldn't be easy. There were still so many challenges ahead. But now, she knew she didn't have to face them alone. With the support of Xie Jiayuan, her friends, and her family, she could take on whatever came her way. And so, with a renewed sense of determination, she set her phone down and took a deep breath. The future was still uncertain, but she felt ready for whatever it held. With her friends by her side, and with Xie Jiayuan's quiet strength to lean on, she knew she would find her way. "It's not about doing it alone," she thought. "It's about finding the strength to keep going with the people who believe in you, no matter what." Qiao Bailu sat at her desk, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, casting long shadows across the pages of her textbooks. The world outside felt distant now, distant and irrelevant. She had grown used to the weight of her books, the constant presence of her assignments, and the endless cycle of studying. But today felt different. Today, the pressure felt like it was pushing her toward something greater. Her fingers moved slowly over the pages, absorbing the words, committing the formulas and facts to memory. The subjects that once seemed insurmountable, especially physics, which had always haunted her, were no longer as intimidating. There was a quiet determination in the way she approached her studies now. Every chapter was a stepping stone, not just toward an exam, but toward something bigger. She wasn't studying just to pass. She was studying to grow, to build the foundation for something much more important than grades. Her future. It hadn't been easy. There were days when the material felt overwhelming, days when the pressure to succeed felt almost suffocating. But Qiao Bailu had learned to embrace it. She had learned to find clarity in the chaos, to take each day as it came, and to trust in the process. She had pushed herself for so long, driven by the fear of failure, but now there was a quiet confidence in her heart. She knew that with every hour she dedicated to her studies, she was building not just a future of academic success, but a foundation for her creative endeavors as well. Her mind wandered back to her writing, to the novels she dreamed of one day publishing. She couldn't help but imagine the stories she would create, stories that would reflect the struggles she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and the strength she had found within herself. What if all of this learning, this effort, is the key to my future as a writer? The thought made her heart quicken with excitement. She knew she had a long way to go, but she was no longer afraid of the journey. The hours seemed to slip by unnoticed as she immersed herself in her work. Physics equations that once seemed like impossible riddles were now manageable puzzles. History dates and political theories, once a blur of names and events, began to make sense. She wasn't just memorizing facts. She was internalizing them, making them part of herself. It was then that she realized the true shift in her mindset. For the first time, she wasn't just studying to pass. She wasn't simply cramming for exams or chasing after the fleeting sense of accomplishment that came with a good grade. No, this was different. She was studying to understand, to deepen her knowledge, to become a better version of herself. She wasn't just preparing for tests. She was preparing for life. Her focus had sharpened over time. It wasn't always easy. There were days when her mind felt exhausted, when the material seemed to swirl in a haze of confusion, and she wondered if she would ever truly master everything she needed to know. But those moments were fewer now. With each passing day, she became more confident in her ability to learn, to adapt, to overcome. It wasn't just about academic achievement anymore. It was about self-improvement. She had realized that the lessons she was learning, both in the classroom and in life, were all interconnected. The skills she was building now, the perseverance, the patience, the ability to face difficulty without giving up, these were the same qualities that would serve her as a writer. Her stories would be richer, more authentic, because they came from someone who understood the value of hard work, of dedication, of continuing to move forward, even when the world seemed to be pushing her back. Her mind returned to Xie Jiayuan's words, the encouragement he had given her when she had been uncertain about her path. "You don't have to do it all at once," he had said. "Take it one step at a time. Just keep going." She had held on to those words, and now they felt more meaningful than ever. One step at a time. That was all it took. Every step, no matter how small, brought her closer to her goals. The pressure was still there, of course. Her family's expectations had never gone away. But something had shifted inside her. She no longer felt burdened by their hopes for her. She no longer felt like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Instead, she felt empowered. This was her journey, her future, and no matter how difficult the path might seem, she was ready to walk it. As the weeks passed, Qiao Bailu began to notice the changes in herself. She was no longer the same person who had been paralyzed by fear, caught between the expectations of others and her own insecurities. She was becoming someone stronger, someone who could take on the challenges that life threw her way. She was learning not just how to succeed academically, but how to face adversity head-on and keep moving forward. Her relationship with her studies had transformed as well. She wasn't just looking for quick results anymore. She was building something lasting. Every lesson learned, every piece of knowledge absorbed, was a building block for the future she was creating. She wasn't just working to pass a test. She was working to become someone who could write stories that mattered, stories that resonated with others. Her fingers stopped moving across the pages for a moment, and she closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She felt a sense of calm wash over her, a quiet pride in the work she had done. She had come so far already, and the journey was far from over. But now, with each passing day, she felt more and more like the person she had always wanted to be. She wasn't just studying, she was growing, and with that growth came a renewed sense of hope, of possibility. The future wasn't as uncertain as it once seemed. With each step, she was creating the life she had always dreamed of, one step at a time. Qiao Bailu sat quietly at her desk, the weight of the past few months settling in as she gazed out the window. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the city. The world outside seemed to hum with life, but here in her room, the silence was all-encompassing. She had been so focused on her studies, so determined to improve and succeed, that for a while she had forgotten about the world beyond the classroom. Now, she could feel the shift, the realization that life wasn't just about grades or books. There was more to it, much more. As the school year progressed, the pressures of academia remained. But with each passing day, Qiao Bailu started to see the bigger picture. It's not enough to just study, she thought. I need to experience life. I need to understand the world beyond textbooks. She could no longer ignore the deeper questions that had been lingering in her mind. What was the point of all this learning if she couldn't apply it in real life? What was the purpose of all her hard work if it didn't translate into the future she had been dreaming of? Her friends had been talking more about their plans for the future, about universities they wanted to attend, careers they hoped to pursue, and the lives they wanted to build. And suddenly, Qiao Bailu realized that her journey wasn't just about writing or school. It was about living fully, about taking what she had learned and using it to navigate the unpredictable twists and turns of life. She found herself spending more time with her friends, not just studying together, but talking about their dreams, their fears, and their futures. They shared their hopes for the future, the things they wanted to achieve, and the doubts that weighed on their minds. It was in these conversations that Qiao Bailu began to understand how important it was to keep learning, not just from textbooks, but from the world around her. The experiences she gathered, the people she met, and the challenges she faced. They would all shape the person she was becoming. But even as she opened herself up to new perspectives, there was still a nagging feeling deep inside her. The need to prove herself, the weight of her family's expectations, the desire to succeed in a way that would make everything they had sacrificed worth it. I can't afford to lose focus, she reminded herself. I need to keep pushing forward. Her resolve only deepened when, one afternoon, she received an email from another publisher. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the message. This wasn't just any publisher. It was one of the largest in the country, a name she had heard time and time again in the industry. They were offering her a contract, one that was more substantial than anything she had ever imagined. It wasn't just the financial offer that caught her attention, though. It was the promise of support, of resources, of a real chance to bring her work into the world. She stared at the screen for a long moment, the words swimming before her eyes. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Her heart raced with excitement and fear. She had worked so hard for this moment, had spent countless nights writing, revising, struggling, and doubting herself. But now, here it was, an opportunity to finally make her dreams a reality. She sat back in her chair trying to process what this meant. Is this it? She wondered. Is this my breakthrough? A sense of pride filled her chest, but it was quickly followed by doubt. Am I ready? She had always imagined this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was prepared to step into the future that awaited her. Xie Jiayuan's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of the conversations they had shared about their futures. Take it one step at a time, Bailu. Don't rush. You'll know what feels right. His words had always been a steadying force in her life, and now, as she faced the opportunity of a lifetime, they felt even more significant. She knew she couldn't make this decision alone, but she also knew that, ultimately, the choice had to be hers. As she reflected on the email, she realized how much she had grown in the past year. She wasn't the same person who had first sat down to write her stories, unsure of herself and her abilities. She had learned to trust her instincts, to believe in her potential, and to face the challenges ahead with a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just a student fighting for grades. She was a writer, ready to take on the world. The next morning, Qiao Bailu met with Xie Jiayuan in their usual spot, a small cafe tucked away from the bustling streets. He was sitting at their table, his usual calm demeanor unchanged, despite the fact that they both knew the reason she had called him there. She sat down across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled the email from her bag. I got an offer, she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with excitement. From a big publisher. They want to sign me. Xie Jiayuan looked up at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before his lips curved into a small smile. That's great, he said. his voice warm with sincerity. "You've worked so hard for this. You deserve it." Qiao Bailu smiled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "It's more than I ever expected, but I don't know if I'm ready. This is the opportunity I've been waiting for, but it's also terrifying. What if I fail?" Xie Jiayuan leaned forward, his gaze steady and reassuring. "You've already proven yourself. You're ready, Bailu. You just have to trust yourself. Take the leap." Her heart raced, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't out of fear. It was a surge of excitement, of confidence, of knowing that this was the moment she had been preparing for. She had worked so hard to get here, and now she was ready to take the next step. She had grown, not just as a student, but as a person, learning to embrace the challenges, the setbacks, and the victories along the way. With a deep breath, Qiao Bailu made her decision. This was the moment. She would sign the contract. She would take the opportunity and continue to grow, to create, and to push forward into the future. And as she looked at Xie Jiayuan, she realized that no matter where her journey took her, she would never be alone. She had the support of her friends, her family, and herself. That was all she needed to move forward. Qiao Bailu stood at the edge of the decision that would define the next chapter of her life. Her fingers rested on the edge of her desk, the contract from the major publisher still lying there, taunting her with its promise and its cost. It was everything she had dreamed of, an offer that could elevate her career to new heights, provide her with the exposure she had always craved, and open doors to the kind of success she had always imagined. And yet, in the back of her mind, doubt still lingered. The road ahead was clear. If she signed this contract, she would have the resources to push her writing to the next level, to get her stories out into the world. But with that came the heavy expectation, the pressure to succeed and to meet the demands of the publisher, the fear of a failure, of being just another writer who didn't make it, gnawed at her. But then she thought about everything she had worked for, the years of struggle, of self-doubt, of moments where she had questioned whether any of this was worth it, the countless nights she had spent writing, not knowing if anyone would ever read her stories. And yet, here she was, standing at the precipice of something that could change everything. She thought of the moments that had led her to this point, the late-night study sessions with Xie Jiayuan, his quiet encouragement, the warmth of her friends who had always believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. They had all been part of her journey, and now it was time to take the final step. With a deep breath, she picked up the pen and signed the contract. It was a simple act, but it felt like the culmination of everything she had worked for. She had made her choice, and it wasn't an easy one. But as the ink flowed across the paper, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. This was her decision. This was the path she had chosen, and no matter what lay ahead, she would walk it with confidence. As she sat back in her chair, the weight of the decision still heavy in her chest, she thought about the future. The future wasn't something she had ever been able to predict. Not really. There were too many unknowns, too many things that could go wrong. But now, for the first time in a long while, She didn't feel paralyzed by fear. The future felt like a blank canvas, ready for her to paint her own picture. She wasn't blind to the challenges that lay ahead. She knew that this decision would come with sacrifices. She would have to work harder than ever before, pushing herself to meet the high expectations of her publisher and her readers. There would be moments of doubt, moments when she would question if she was enough, if her stories would ever truly make an impact. But she also knew that this was the only way forward. There would be no easy road, no shortcuts. But as long as she kept moving, one step at a time, she could navigate whatever came her way. Qiao Bailu felt stronger now, more confident than she had ever been. The weight of her decision had been heavy, but now it was empowering. She had taken control of her future. She had chosen to take the leap, to embrace the uncertainty, and to face the unknown head on. She wasn't afraid of what came next. Her mind turned to the stories she still wanted to tell, the characters that lived inside her, waiting to be brought to life, the worlds she had created in her mind, worlds full of mystery, adventure, and emotion. She had so many stories left to write, so many ideas to explore. She knew this was just the beginning. As the days passed, Qiao Bailu felt herself changing. She was no longer the same person who had hesitated in the face of opportunity, afraid to make the wrong choice. She was someone who knew what it meant to follow her heart, to trust her instincts, and to never give up on her dreams. The road would not be easy, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she had the courage to walk it, no matter how steep the climb or how many obstacles lay in her way. With a sense of calm confidence, she stood up from her desk and looked out the window. The sky was darkening, the stars beginning to twinkle above. The world was vast, full of endless possibilities, and she was ready to take them on. This is just the beginning, she thought, her heart swelling with anticipation. The journey is far from over, but I know that each step I take will bring me closer to my dreams. And no matter how difficult the road, I will keep moving forward, never looking back. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the quiet of the room. Her decision had been made. The path was set. The future, uncertain as it was now hers to shape. And with that, Qiao Bailu knew she was ready for everything.